afternoon, everyone. So I know you've been in lockup all day, so I'll try to be as brief as I can. So the Auditor General has confirmed what we've all suspected. The government's so-called environment plan is a made-to-fail plan. It relies on magic math and magic markets to achieve weakened targets. And here's the bottom line. We face a climate emergency. People are facing ice storms, floods, droughts, and other climate catastrophes. And the Ford government is not only wasting our tax dollars, sabotaging the federal government's climate plan, the premier's policies are actually sabotaging his own so-called climate plan. Every step along the way, this government is using magic math, double counting emissions, overestimating the impact of their weak plan, and failing to account for the damage of their anti-climate policies. They have the audacity to rely on electric vehicles to meet a big chunk of their emission targets while cutting all the programs to support EVs. 15% of their reduction targets are with uninvented innovation, and they have no plans of how they're actually going to support that innovation. The list goes on and on and on. The minister actually even admitted today that it's really not a plan. It's actually a draft plan. It's a living document, and that he's going to consult the people of Ontario on how to fix it. Well, here's the problem. How is the government going to consult the people of Ontario when they're actually undermining the Environmental Bill of Rights, the very mechanism in which they consult Ontarians on environmental policies? This report is a damning condemnation of the way in which the government is removing transparency and accountability mechanisms in the EBR. Comment periods are being shortened, depriving public and the experts the time and opportunity to participate in consultations. Over 50% of EBR postings from this government don't even have adequate information contained in the posting for the public to actually provide adequate input. So I don't know how this government is going to consult people when they've actually undermined the very mechanism in which to consult people on environmental changes. There's many items in this report. There are two additional areas I want to focus in on that I find deeply concerning. This report amplifies the severity of the mental health crisis we're facing in Ontario. The statistics the Auditor General put forward are staggering. 1 in 10 Ontarians have a substance abuse problem. Wait times for treatment is going up. Opioid deaths have risen by 70%. And EV visits for substance abuse have increased by 40%. And yet the Auditor General has said that funding for mental health and addictions is not being effectively or efficiently based on need, and we even lack standards of treatment of care. I'm deeply concerned about the connection between mental health and incarceration, and the fact that so many people with mental health challenges are being incarcerated in facilities that have no capacity to serve them. And finally, I just want to close by the shocking report on long-term care. The fact that the food that is being served long-term care patients is completely inadequate, and I would say irresponsible. And some of the challenges facing long-term care, especially around the increase in complexity of care and the need to provide minimum standards of care and support for staff to be able to care for our loved ones, is absolutely needed. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mike, I'm interested to know, given this report and given the comments from Minister Urick about taking everything into account, how much do you expect to change? How quickly? You know, in the next year, are they going to come out and nail a whole bunch of policies?
Well, over a year ago, I stood in this very room and put forward a 50-point climate plan, which I sent to Minister Phillips, the minister at the time. I've reshared it with Minister Urick. And, you know, the government can say, oh, we'll talk all we want, but if they're not going to implement any of the ideas in the plan, then the province isn't going to achieve our climate emission targets. Here's the bottom line is, we have the technology, we have the solutions, we just need the political will to implement the solutions.
In the grand scheme of things, Mike, where do you think this leaves our province when it comes to climate change?
Well, I would give it a failing grade. I mean, this was a pretty damning report from the Auditor General. And this is a made-to-fail plan. And I mean, the bottom line is actually something that I don't think it's maybe been talked about enough today either is that the Auditor General clearly stated something I've been saying for a long time now, that actually 30% emission reductions below 2005 targets isn't even good enough. If we're going to meet an objective of 1.5 degrees Celsius, we actually need a 39% reduction. So it just shows you how far off this government is. And the thing that I find particularly disappointing is this government says they want to be open for business. Well, the fastest growing sector of the global economy is the clean economy. We have so many clean innovations, whether it's electric vehicles or renewable energy. But this government, is actively sabotaging those solutions, and to add insult to injury, actually using our tax dollars, wasting our tax dollars to sabotage those solutions.
How did you think Minister Urick looked when he came out here? He seemed somewhat subdued. His head was down a lot. Do you think he looked sheepish? What did you take from his posture and his language?
Well, if I was a minister, I would be very subdued and sheepish too, trying to defend a made-to-fail plan. As a matter of fact, I think the minister finally concluded by the end of his comments that it's actually not a plan. It's a draft. It's, I think, quote, a living document. We need a plan now. We're facing a climate emergency. We have hundreds of thousands of young people marching in the streets on Fridays demanding action. We're facing a climate emergency, and the environment minister says he has a draft plan that he now wants to go talk to people about. Not good enough.
When you look at the government's when you look at the government's actions, when you look at the government's actions on climate change, can you conclude that they care about it?
Well, if they cared about climate change, they would actually have a plan that works. They would understand the urgency of the issue, and they would be taking concrete actions now. I mean, what we've heard from them over and over again is they take credit for reductions that were achieved under the previous government, and then they try to pull the wool over people's eyes by referring to their so-called environment plan, which now the Auditor General has revealed what I think we all have suspected for a long time now, that it's a made-to-fail plan. And then to add insult to injury, you have the Minister of Energy citing climate change denial blogs to justify ripping up renewable energy contracts. You have the ministry appointing somebody who says climate change is actually going to be good for Canada to be on the board of, an overseer of our electricity system. I mean, tell that to the people who are facing floods and ice storms and droughts and other climatic events right now, that it's somehow going to be good for Canada. That is just not acceptable.
Like, electric vehicles tend to be expensive, and everyone would like to have one, but it still is an exorbitant cost right now. Well, why should the government be subsidizing the cost of an electric vehicle for anyone who wants to buy one?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's take a step back on transportation for a second. We need a comprehensive solution around transportation that begins with having investments in electrified public transit. Like, that is probably our most effective solution. Then we need to make sure we design our communities in ways that, allow people to walk and cycle and use other forms of transportation. One of the things that was also mentioned in the Auditor General's report is that the government's land use planning changes, which is going to incentivize sprawl, is actually going to be another thing that undermines our climate plan, which will undermine transportation. So then we need electric vehicles on top of all of that. So, I mean, one of the biggest barriers for people wanting to use electric vehicles is actually charging infrastructure. So we should have government incentives for charging infrastructure all across the province. The prices of electric vehicles are coming down. I think, at the very least, this government has said over and over again, I've said we should have an EV rebate program. They keep saying no. Well, maybe at the very least, why don't they take the HST off of EV vehicle purchases to help incentivize people? But once you have an electric vehicle, the actual cost of operating it are 1/5 to 1/10 the cost of a gasoline-powered vehicle. So if the Premier is serious, he's always talking about how he wants to save people money at the pumps. If he really wants to help people save money at the pumps, we'd get rid of the pumps and we'd go fully electric.
What do you think of him, pointing to Tim Hortons and Canadian Tire as the ones that should be putting in, and we should get out of the way and let the market put them in?
Yeah, I think the government should provide tax incentives for businesses to invest in EV charging to help scale and ramp it up. This government all the time talks about tax incentives for businesses. Well, why not accelerated depreciation or tax incentives for private companies that want to install charging infrastructure? At the same time, We need to have public investment in charging infrastructure as well. Every public parking facility in Ontario should have publicly available charging infrastructure.
Mike, how can you take seriously? Well, you don't take it seriously, so, but you said magic math. I mean, I think there's a little more than magic going on here. Don't you think? I mean, they included cap and trade,
Yep.
and these renewable energy contracts, which
Yep.
they boast about canceling, which they campaigned on.
I know.
In November of that year, they put them into their business as usual estimate for 2030. That's the target they need to get below.
Mm-hmm.
Was that incompetence, or was that an intent to deceive us? Do you think?
You know, you'll have to ask the government what their intent was, but it certainly, I think, confirms what I've said, which is magic math. It certainly confirms that they seem to be trying to pull the wool over people's eyes in terms of what their plan can accomplish. And you're absolutely right. Not only are they sabotaging the own elements of their plan, I mean, many of the elements in their plan, they've actually actively put forward policies that undermine that. They're also wasting our money trying to sabotage the federal government's climate plan. So, you know, to me, how are we going to address this crisis if we have a government that is sabotaging the federal government's plan and sabotaging their own plan?
Like you say, obviously that they need to have this plan in place right now, but that's just not the reality. So with this draft plan, you know, if you were to put a timestamp on it in terms of when they need to actually convert that draft into reality, clock is ticking. How much time do you think that they have?
Well, I think they should have done it a year and a half ago, but as soon as possible. We have no more days to waste. Again, the previous minister and this minister both have access to my 50-point climate plan. Happy to share it with them again.
At what point then do we kind of fall off a cliff, right? At what point do we reach a danger point
okay.
for
Yeah,
Ontario?
good. Okay, so let's look at what the scientists are telling us. Okay, so what scientists have told us that if by 2020, which the last time I checked is less than a month away, if the trajectory of global emissions don't start trending downward, so peak and trend downward, we're going to be looking at climate catastrophe in 10 years. So when the IPCC report came out last year, there was a lot of talk that we had till 2030 to reduce emissions by around 40%. But what was not talked about enough in that report was that globally, if we're going to achieve that 40% reduction, the actual trend line has to start going down in 2020. So I would say immediately we need to reverse the trend curve.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thanks.